Good morning and welcome. I'm Joe Ruffalo, General Manager of The Hill. I'd like to thank you all for coming here this morning, both in person and everyone online, for our Future of Defense Summit, Accelerating Innovation and Next-Gen Defense. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Lockheed Martin, for their support of this very important discussion today. As geopolitical tensions continue to rise, the need for strategic investments in emerging technologies to defend the United States, its allies, and its partners against growing threats has never been greater. At the same time, the nation faces a unique and critical opportunity to strengthen the U.S. defense industrial base to deter America's greatest adversaries. How should the U.S. best ensure industry capacity, resilience, and collaboration on emerging technologies with its allies and partners? And as the front lines move increasingly from boots on the ground to cyber warfare, how prepared are we to defend ourselves in the changing face of conflict? We hope to answer these questions and to discuss how to build an advanced defense industry and enhance deterrence through a robust and integrated defense network. Before we get underway, for those of you in the room, we ask you to please silence your phone, but we encourage you to join the conversation online. You can follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram at The Hill Events using the hashtag #TheHillDefense. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce our first guest, Senator Deb Fischer, a Republican from Nebraska and senior member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and she joins our very own Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks for everyone who watching and has come here on a very early Thursday. Senator, I want to ask you news of the day, but it's also very relevant to this discussion. We saw the House last night try to pass a continuing resolution. Are we going to be, and it failed, as expected, where do we go from here as far as avoiding a shutdown?
Well, obviously in the Senate, we're watching what goes on in the House to be able to see what they're able to put together and send over to us. I believe Leader Schumer will file a shell bill. Right. To be able to adjust to whatever comes over or to fill it with what he decides needs to be done. And we'll take it up probably next week.
There's been controversy, obviously, about the legislation, what should be in it, but also on the time frame. Do you support a shorter time frame, 3 months, or more like 6 months?
I support a shorter time frame. I would like us to be able to address the needs we have in this current year, get it done before the end of the year. So no matter who wins the presidency, we can start moving ahead and start planning for what we need as soon as possible in January. This last Congress, we didn't get our committee assignments until into February. I hope that doesn't happen again. Whoever's leader, I hope we can be able to get our committee assignments and really get to work. You know, it's important. I'm on the, not just Armed Services, but Appropriations Committee. And to be able to take up those bills and do it quickly so we can be on schedule, get back to regular order. That's just vital for the process to be able to do it. I give Chairman Murray and Susan Collins a lot of credit for the last 2 years. And I've just been on appropriations 2 years. But to be able to have our hearings, to be able to do oversight, to be able to show the American people that we're doing the work we're supposed to do and oversight, to have that accountability, it's vital that we do it. And I give them a lot of credit. When I first saw the schedule, I thought, ooh, this is ambitious. But it worked. It worked because we all wanted it to.
So are you optimistic that there's no shortage of drama on Capitol Hill, as you know, but do you think we'll avoid a government shutdown by the end of the month?
I would hope so.
Okay. Speaking of bills, you've introduced the Restoring American Deterrence Act. Can you tell us a little bit about that measure and its path to passage?
It is a great bill, first of all, a great bill. And it's a good bill because it follows the recommendations that came out of the Strategic Posture Commission. This was a bipartisan commission that came up with 81 unanimous recommendations. That's almost unheard of in this day and age. And they're recommendations that truly address the threats that we now face. And I incorporated many of those into the legislation that I introduced. I thank Chairman Reed because he also put my bill, basically from those recommendations, into the chairman's mark in our NDAA that we've passed out of committee. We want to be able to keep those in there. We want to make sure that they're part of the conference that comes out of the House and Senate, because they make sense. They make sense to address two peer nuclear competitors. They make sense to be able to address the workforce needs we have with regards to our nuclear enterprise. They make sense in setting plans that we need in order for looking especially at our ICBMs and what we need there for our land-based ICBMs. Makes sense on looking at a third shipyard for nuclear shipbuilding. So I think it addresses not just the threats, but the pace we see, the breathtaking pace that we see our adversaries have in meeting their nuclear needs.
Speaking of adversaries, what keeps you up at night? What are the challenges? I mean, I know most elections, and this one included, are focused on domestic issues. But if you really think about the foreign policy challenges ahead for the next 5 to 10 years, they're quite daunting. Which adversaries are you most concerned about?
Well, you'd have to say China and Russia. And it is the threat that they pose. We're looking at two peer adversaries when it comes to our nuclear deterrence that we have. We're behind. You know, we are barely on schedule when it comes to our nuclear triad and being able to continue to modernize the platforms that we have. And we look at just addressing our strategic needs when we have adversaries who are looking at what they want to address in theater or a novel nuclear progression as they move there. We are very mindful of that. In fact, every time we're in a classified briefing and we get reports from a number of our combatant commanders and the secretary, my comment is always, you know, well, when will we get there? And my second comment is always, that's too late.
There you go. You mentioned the Strategic Commission report. There have been some critics of that report who said it's a doomsday scenario, it doesn't factor in costs. What is your response to that criticism?
It's a realistic scenario.
Okay. Why?
It's a realistic scenario. You had a commission with experts when it comes to defense of our country, when it comes to national security. They came together, and these are people that don't necessarily agree on everything when it comes to our national security. They did on this because they received, obviously, a number of briefings. They understand what the threats are, and we need to move past the Cold War, where we kind of just dropped the ball on everything. We need to move past the Gulf War and the Iraq War, where we did not pick up the ball again and be able to produce, for example, the munitions that we need, and really take a serious, rational, reasonable look at what the needs are that we have for our national security.
You mentioned munitions. I wanted to ask you about that. I'm not a defense expert, so for people watching, why is it so important to increase the nation's munitions capacity?
You know, we learned that. I think it was one of the first lessons we learned from our activity that we have with Ukraine right now. When we have our allies sending munitions to Ukraine, as we are as well, and for us to be able just to backfill what our allies are sending, let alone meet the needs of this country, we don't have that capability right now. We have to be able to have a production, and we need to be able to produce them fast. We don't have that. So probably at least 2 years ago, I started asking at hearings that we had in Sask about munitions. And if we have what we need so we can continue to provide for our security before we're sending everything overseas, before we're helping our allies, we have to make sure that we can meet our needs first, that we can protect our homeland first. And I think that's been a wake-up call as well. So when I talk about we need to be able to have that production capacity, that is very serious, and we need to do it. For the Gulf War and the Iraq War, it took, I think, up to 2 years before they were able to meet the capacity for just those wars.
You mentioned you're on appropriations and obviously the Armed Services Committee. My colleague Alex Bolton did a great story today about how the Harris and Trump campaigns are, their proposals are quite pricey, and they're not really, they have no plan to reduce the debt. And national security officials have said that the debt is a major concern. So in that dual role where you see the import of defense, but also, so I want to ask you about the Pentagon budget and what we need to do there, but how do we pay for it all?
We have to set priorities. We have to set priorities as a country. And obviously, the first duty of Congress is to provide for the common defense. It's to be able to provide for our military men and women. We have a voluntary military. We need to make sure that we care for them and compensate them well. And we need to be able to make those tough decisions and look at programs and ask the question, is this truly a core responsibility of a federal government? And those are hard conversations to have when you're talking about cutting programs, but that's the only way that we are going to be able to meet the needs we have to protect this homeland, our homeland, and still be able to be a leader in the world, because I happen to believe the world is safer when America leads.
You mentioned having basically boots on the ground, and we have an aging population, and recruiting is a major concern right now. How do we fix that?
We fix it by looking at what the needs are for a voluntary military. And I believe on the Armed Services Committee in the Senate, we continue to get better at doing that. I know the House has had different committees. In fact, Representative Bacon from Nebraska led a committee on that to look at the needs of our military men and women. And we need to obviously prioritize those, take them into consideration, but also reach a balance on how we can meet the resource needs in hardware for our military, give them the resources they need, while also meeting their family needs, their physical needs.
You're the ranking member of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. Can you tell us the purview of the panel and what's your agenda going forward?
We have a great subcommittee, and I can't say enough good things about Angus King. He and I have a wonderful working relationship on that subcommittee. When he came on 4 years ago as the chair, which, by the way, I hope to be the chair in January.
But got a decent chance based upon the Senate map.
We're hoping.
Yeah, yes.
But I want to continue our really, really good relationship and our working relationship. And it's because we both put in the time. We both try to educate ourselves more and more to be able to have a better and a deeper understanding, again, of the threats that we face and what's needed. We traveled together to Minot, to Stratcom in Omaha. We've gone through lots of briefings together, just the two of us, so that we can not just enhance our education, but so we can keep up to date and know what's going on in the world.
You've name-checked a number of senators, and all in a good way, on both sides of the aisle. These issues, we're living in such polarizing times, and obviously there's more bipartisanship in the Senate, but it can get nasty in the Senate as well. To fix these massive problems that we're facing and our adversaries and the threats are increasing, clearly, what has to happen in Congress as far as people getting along and getting things done?
I think on the Senate Armed Services Committee, we have a good relationship.
Yep.
You know, you can see the votes on NDAA when it comes out of committee. It's passed overwhelmingly. On the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, Angus and I, we've just, for many years, have taken the stand that we want to make sure that all our members are educated on the issues, and we have really good attendance at our subcommittee hearings. Our members are interested. They want to know what they need to know to make good decisions. And so I always say that and give people that information because national defense is bipartisan. It should be. It should be. And I think the Armed Services Committee in the United States Senate takes pains to work together to produce a truly bipartisan product that takes care of our military and that protects the country.
Question I'm going to be asking several speakers. We obviously have a big election, looking at the plans for moving forward and protecting the country. What do you see as the key differences between Trump and Harris, and what would you like to see maybe more of, maybe more specifics on?
I want to see any administration prioritize national security. I don't know if that always happens. Okay. And not to be partisan, but I don't believe it's happened with this administration. You've seen the Armed Services Committee in the Senate for the last 3 years increase what the president sends us for his budget. And that's a recognition by the committee on a bipartisan basis, an understanding, again, of what the needs of our country are, and to try and continue to move forward and budget what we need, and we're still not there at what we truly need, but to keep increasing that budget. And so I hope whoever is in the White House, that they take it seriously, that they take their job as commander-in-chief seriously, and present us with a budget that is more realistic in recognizing what the threats are in this country. I also hope that whoever is in the White House, that they are able, this is kind of a mission I've been on for several years, to declassify a lot of material that we hear in classified briefings, because I happen to believe if the American people have a better understanding of the dangerous world we live in, they will be more supportive of what our country needs to do to keep us safe.
So you're in those classified briefings and you see a lot of stuff that shouldn't be classified. Certainly a lot of journalists think there's way too much classification going on.
I think a lot can be moved to unclassified without compromising any personnel or methods.
Have you seen any improvements in that area, or there's a lot to be done?
I think the Strategic Posture Commission report lays it out pretty bluntly and very honestly about the situation we're in. So I would commend that report to all journalists and folks out there to read that and have a better understanding of what we do face.
Well, this has gone quickly. We're out of time. Please thank the Senator for joining us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Nice meeting you. Do it again.
Please welcome to the stage Congressman Adam Smith, a Democrat from Washington State and ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee.
How are you? Thanks. I first want to start off, the country's been through a lot over the last several years. COVID, we've got wars going on, and inflation, assassination attempts, and it's difficult mentally. And I want to first ask you about your book, because I think it was very courageous to write Lost and Broken, about how people can deal, your struggle with mental health, but I think also people can take a lot from it. Can you talk a little bit about that process and that book?
Well, sure. And the dominant piece of that, what I came to at the end, was that you can find help for mental challenges. Okay. That was one of my big problems up front was I didn't think of mental health in the same way that I thought of physical health. As I said in the book, throughout most of my life, it's like you were either crazy or you were normal. And if you stayed on the normal side, everything was fine. But that's not really the way mental health works. Anxiety, depression can come from a whole lot of different sources, and I learned how it works. And it took me a while. So if you are struggling with any sort of mental health challenge, it is absolutely worth it to get help, find solutions, and you can get better. You can build resilience. Something that somebody said to me very early on in my struggle was that it's not the amount of stress in your life, it's how you process it. And at the time, forgive me, I thought that was insane. I was like, well, that can't possibly be true. But it actually is. I mean, there are, and I could walk through I have like a little 5-minute mental health spiel, which I don't have time for this morning. But there are some basic things about cognitive behavioral therapy, how you deal with trauma, and then how you deal with the sense of your own self-worth that really impact your ability to process the stresses of life. And it really is true. If you get your mental health right, you can handle a lot more. So I would just urge people to really think about their mental health in the same way they think about their physical health. You know, you get a yearly physical, you know, you have your well child exams when they're right. You go through all those things, you know, you colonoscopy, breast exam, all these things that we know for our physical health. If you view your mental health the same way, it can really, really be very rewarding.
Well, books like that really take the stigma out of it, and obviously a lot of people in my family and everybody's family, we know people who struggle with that. So let's get to what happened last night on the House floor. The CR failed. Chairman Rogers voted against it, as he promised to do. Now what?
Yeah, well, it's funny. One of the things on the mental health side is I always believe you have to maintain your sense of humor. And I realize most people look at our job and say, there's nothing funny about it, you know? And it is serious business, but you say that funny. It just amuses me that, let's just call them the extremists within the Republican Party can't even decide on how they want to be extreme together. It's like, I thought of it as sort of fanatic on fanatic violence last night. You had one group of people who were insisting that we had to have this, you know, ridiculous anti-voting law and a 6-month CR, and you had another group of people insisting, no, we have to dramatically slash the budget. They couldn't even get on the same page. So my hope, I think what happens now is what should have happened to begin with, which is it's not hard. You got the House, you got the Senate, you got the White House, you got Democrats, you got Republicans. They all got to sit down and figure out how do we stop the government from shutting down on October 1, and crucially, how do we pass the appropriations bills, which we have done every year. It's just that we wait so long because we are trying to appease the unappeasable, okay? There is a group of people who do not want to fund the government, all right? They're not going to vote to fund the government, okay? So why we continually negotiate with them over and over and over again, just so they can once again say, yeah, I'm not voting for that, is a little bit hard to understand. So I hope we'll get the appropriators together. Appropriations Committee, I think, functions quite well when it is allowed to do so.
Right.
So that's what I think will happen, and that's what I think has to happen.
So that would be better if you have someone like Tom Cole leading the process as opposed to the speaker.
Yeah, that's a more complicated conversation. Let's just say I trust Tom and Rosa. I think the two of them will work together. And yeah, now the speaker just has to empower them to do so.
The senator was mentioning how she hopes to be chair next year, and I'm sure you also hope to be chair next year. You feeling good about the election? Do you think, number one, that you can take back the House, and number two, if you do, what would be your agenda as chairman?
Lots of questions in that. I believe we can. Yes, I think we're well positioned to do that. I think we have a very strong nominee. Certainly that shift to the vice president has been enormously helpful and put us in a good position. But look, we all know, highly competitive country, there's 47 days to go. A lot is going to happen between now and then. So yes, it is. I believe that we are well positioned if we take advantage of the opportunity, but we'll see how that turns out. That's number one. Number two, one of the good things about the Armed Services Committee, and I heard Senator Fischer talking about the Senate Armed Services Committee, I think it's true there and it's true here. Mike Rogers and I have a remarkably similar agenda. There are things that are different, But he and I are really committed, regardless of whether he's chair and I'm ranking or vice versa, to pursuing that. And number one builds off of what we've done this week. We had a field hearing out in Silicon Valley, and then we had a hearing yesterday in the National Defense Strategy. We are really focused on innovation and tech. How do we get the Department of Defense to more rapidly adopt the technologies that are crucial to the warfight right now, which is secure communications, information systems, drones, counter drones, missile defense. How do we speed up that process? And overlaying all of it is get DoD to be better at buying software. And we've got a lot of different ideas for how do we need to do that. So that is, number one on the agenda. Number two is to build off of the quality of life panel that we did to really improve quality of life issues for our servicemen and women and their families. We put a very...
And tell us a little bit about that bill, because that's on my list.
Sure. Yeah, it's really just sort of focused on, pay, obviously, but also housing, jobs, childcare, all the things that go into the quality of life for a service member and their families, to make them want to, and be able to stay in the military and make it work for their families, to reward them in the way that they should. One of the issues is, can spouses find employment? You move state to state, licensing things change. How can we simplify that? There's a whole bunch of different ideas to do that around recruitment. One other thing I wanted to say about recruitment, I think we need to look at a lot of the presumptive disqualifications that exist in the military. I really didn't realize this until I had a constituent, and I forget exactly what the problem was, had some childhood ailment that made him presumptively disqualified even after getting accepted to the Air Force Academy, and they looked at it and saw the whole thing. We have a lot of things. It's like, if you've ever had any surgery, I had knee surgery when I was 16 years old. That is a presumptive disqualification to get into the military. Now, you can overcome that presumption, but they've got a long list of these things that make it more difficult to serve. And the other piece of it is, we're going through this on the minimum physical fitness requirements. I think it's going to depend on the job you're doing in the military. We need a lot of tech people. We need a lot of communications and intelligence people. Does it make sense to have the same physical standards for them to join the military that it does for an infantryman or an artilleryman? I don't think it does. So I think we need to see how can we expand the pool. So, modernization, innovation, personnel, and then the third piece, how can we work better with our partners and allies, basically, building on AUKUS. Which is about so much more than submarines. I would say, and there's a whole lot of other things, but those are the top three priorities, and I don't think you'd get a different answer from Mike.
You mentioned innovation and technology, and I know this is a big question and difficult to answer, but how is AI going to be changing defense? In
every conceivable way. It is unbelievably useful to what we're doing, but we have to figure out how to use it. You got to have sort of the operational intelligence to know, okay, so these really smart people come up with this tool, but how does it apply? Just one example, I met with C3 AI when I was out in Silicon Valley, and they have an AI system that helps with predictive maintenance. Basically, you have sensors throughout all of your equipment, and those sensors tell you when a part is about to break down, so you fix it before it does. Most estimates show this increases readiness by 25%. Because one of the big problems we have, and they're working with the Air Force, first of all the systems we have in the Air Force, I forget what the numbers are, but in any given day, at least a third to a half of those systems are not usable. They're not combat ready. Okay, if you were to take half, I'm going to get my math wrong here, but if you take half of that and make it ready, that dramatically increases readiness, and predictive maintenance can do that. Another big thing is on the secure comms issue. Part of what happens with communications is it gets blocked, and there's a whole bunch of different satellites, a whole bunch of different ways to communicate. And typical, you would have like one satellite that you're working on. But if you can set up a system where, okay, if that's blocked, you automatically move to the other systems that might be available or to terrestrial options. Well, AI can help with that. It can, put in and plan and say, okay, this one's down. We automatically go to this one, to this one, to this one. It can help in so many different ways. And that's why, the number one biggest thing that we need is a Pentagon that is focused on adaptation and innovation and new technology and how best to use it. We need smart people to make those choices, and we need to empower them to make those choices and sort of take the overwhelmingly restrictive environment that has this long list of requirements.
Right.
That basically you can't go to the bathroom unless you check off 1,000 different boxes, and allow people to make more independent, quicker decisions. That's how we're going to be ready to meet our national security needs.
Cutting through that bureaucracy, how much progress has been made? And obviously it's an ongoing process.
I think we got a long way to go. Basically what we've done, two good things we've done. One, Congress, under Mac Thornberry's leadership for the most part, gave other transactional authority, and there's a number of different names and different ways to get at that other. But we have given that authority to the Pentagon. That's the good news on that one. The bad news on that one is, yes, but we haven't given them a lot of money to use that other transactional authority. Okay. If Congress allows them the freedom to do that, then they can do programs in ways that don't have to go through the normal requirements and all these other processes. But if we budgeted everything down to the last penny and given them no freedom, then they're not able to really exercise that authority to the extent that they should. Second good thing that we did under Ash Carter was DIU. And then Intel side did InQtel, basically provided R&D money for new innovative ideas. And that's good. Okay, we're doing a lot of R&D, but what we didn't provide was much in the way of procurement money. So if you're an innovative, tech company and you get a DIU contract, that's great. You work on the R&D, you come up with a product, and DIU says, we love it, we want to buy it, we'll get back to you in 3 years. And that's the problem. Okay, you can't do that because you got to be able to buy it right then instead of going back and drawing up a whole bunch of requirements, doing a program of record, going through all the whole process. So we have to move more quickly on procurement, and we have to, in my view, give the Pentagon greater flexibility in how they spend their money so that they can buy those new technologies more quickly.
As far as how Congress, there's so many people on the Armed Services Committee and Appropriations and elsewhere say, the way we make laws in this country is crazy, and specifically on defense, when you're constantly punting, and Congress, as you know, punts a lot. Do you think that's going to change? Because it seems like it's a rerun every year.
Well, it's a feature of democracy in the sense that it's more difficult because you have more people who have to agree before you can move forward. Right. I'm not that worried about that. I think we work through it fine. The one thing, and going through it again, we need to hit our appropriations targets sooner. Right. December is not great, but it's okay. March is not okay. So we have to more regularly pass the appropriations bills so that you can get into the rhythm and not be bogged down for 6 months without being able to do new programs, stuck with the old budget. So that would be one thing. But yeah, I do think we need to be more decisive. We also punt too often on getting rid of systems that are no longer functioning. Okay. Trying to hold on to them
That's very
forever.
difficult to get rid of them.
Well, it is, but it's one of the things, the biggest things that Mike Roger and I agree on. You should not be on the Armed Services Committee in order to try to bring back every last dollar to your district. Okay? Now, there's a couple of former members who shall remain nameless who are rolling over in their graves at the moment at that comment. Right. But it's something that I really believe, and it's something that really gets in the way of making smart decisions, is we insist on parochialism over what's in the best interest of the country. And that does slow down the decision-making process. I think we have to get away from that. And I tell this, I'm trying to spread this message in the hopes that members will take it to heart. The belief there is, well, you can't get reelected if you don't bring home the bacon for your district. That's really not true anymore, if it ever was true. Voters are vastly more sophisticated than they used to be. And if you're doing that, they're going to be distrustful of you because they're going to think you're wasting money. And I always use the example of the A-10. We had to save the A-10 for the better part of a decade. First, we had to save it for Ron Barber because he was, he represented that district. It was difficult, so we saved it. He lost. Then we had to save it for Martha McSally. Same thing. She lost twice, okay? So it seems like just saving a program in your district is not actually the key to getting reelected. There are so many different other ways to do it that don't screw up the defense budget and make our country less safe, and I would implore all Republicans and Democrats to embrace that other approach so that we can make better decisions.
I want to ask you the same question I asked Senator Fischer about the different approaches, and they are very different, between Harris and Trump on defense. A lot of people are wondering how Harris would govern. What would you've seen? I remember John Dingell. We interviewed him, and my colleague said, "Well, you served under President so and so," and Dingell reminded us, no, I served with him. I didn't serve under him. You've served with Trump as president. You've seen him as president. What's the difference, and what would you like to see the candidates talk maybe a little bit more about?
Look, I mean, I'll get to the second part of that question, but right up front, and this is going to sound partisan, but c'est la vie. Number one, the difference is, with Harris, partners and allies. With Trump, go it alone. With Harris, calm, sensible leadership. With Trump, chaos, okay? And I'm going to go for the partners and allies and calm, sensible leadership. And I know a lot of people will question that, but Trump made a lot of rash decisions. And for the first 2+ years, he had Jim Mattis there to say, yeah, we're not doing that. Or just to ignore him and not do it. But one that really didn't get a lot of publication, near the end of Trump's term, like June 2020, he decided, I think Angela Merkel said something that he didn't like, so he decided that we needed to pull all of our troops out of Germany. And so the Pentagon spent the last 6 months of his presidency planning that, okay, and getting ready to do it, which is completely insane. Okay, now I know on a superficial level you're like, well, why does Germany need us to defend them? They don't, and we're not in Germany to defend Germany. Okay, we're there because we've built over the course of 6 decades massive training facilities and massive facilities that allow our military to function. Okay, we've got this argument now with the Baltics and Eastern Europe. They want U.S. troops in the East, and that makes sense. Okay. In the sense that that's closer to where the fight is. Having U.S. troops on the border is a major deterrent to Russia, but we can't train them effectively there because the training facilities don't exist, and you cannot build a training facility like that, okay? So we were going to significantly decrease the readiness and capability of our military because Donald Trump got pissed off at Angela Merkel one day. Really? This is the way we're going to function? Okay? There's this great quote from, of all people, Jared Kushner, about Trump. When he was asked about, he seems to sort of flit around a lot. He said, well, that quote from Alice in Wonderland, when you don't know where you're going, you're always on the right path. Yeah, I kind of see that. Not the way I want our country to be run, okay? So I think that's a really important point that simply doesn't get the emphasis that it deserves. Second question about what I'd like to see different. I'd like to see in a Harris administration a commitment to the innovation reform agenda at DOD that we've been talking about here that really has, I think, stalled a little bit since Ash Carter left, frankly.
Why is it stalled?
Because the Pentagon's got a lot to do.
Right.
Okay. And they've been focused on it. And what Secretary Austin has been really good at is building coalitions. Mm-hmm. I mean, the 54-country coalition that's helping Ukraine defend itself is a remarkable achievement. I know everybody wants to pick nits about how come this person isn't doing that, how come we didn't get this system there. When you think back of where we were the first week of March in 2022, of where Ukraine was and what was built to help them defend themselves, mm-hmm. It's pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. What we've been able to do thus far in the Middle East to stop the war from blowing completely out of control through partnerships, alliances, deterrence, also very impressive and also widely underreported. But Secretary Austin and others have done a great job in Asia, with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam now to some extent, Australia, building up partnerships and alliances to better deter. They've been doing that really, really well. They've been trying to fight through our efforts to shut down the government and not fund them. They've been busy, okay?
Right.
But
fair.
I do think that we've lost that central focus on how to change the way the Pentagon does business so it can move more quickly in buying software and new technology.
Many challenges ahead. We're out of time. Please thank Congressman Smith for joining us this morning. Thank you. Thanks so much.
We've now come to the sponsor perspective portion of our program. Please welcome to the stage John Clark, VP and General Manager of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, in conversation with Joe Ruffalo, General Manager of the Hill.
Well, good morning, John. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah.
Just to jump right in, could you tell us more about Skunk Works in general, just so people know all the background of what you do, and then how your team is accelerating innovation in support of the future of defense and 21st century security?
Yeah, absolutely. So Skunk Works, hallmark organization of the Department of Defense that when you go back and look at those aircraft that help facilitate navigating through the Cold War, most of the aircraft that get highlighted are aircraft that came from the Skunk Works. The old adage, Skunk Works was born in 1943, driven by activities in World War II, with the Germans tearing up a lot of our Allied bombers with the Me-262 Messerschmitt. And the Kelly Johnson, who is ultimately the founder of Skunk Works, went to the Army Air Corps and said, I think I can get you a jet fighter in 180 days. And 143 days later, that aircraft took first flight, and that began the Skunk Works. And from that point forward, we've pioneered, innovated with new technology, driving new capabilities into aircraft with a myriad of things. You can see that from what began with the first jet fighter, you had the U-2 taking on high altitude missions and collecting information that was very vital in the 60s and 70s to drive the National Command Authority and the decisions there. That then also beget the SR-71. With the SR-71, an airplane that was shot at a lot but never hit, and it provided a lot of great information. And then transitioning from altitude, then speed, then stealth, and we innovated around stealth. And with that stealth capability, that began the F-117. And that played a very prominent role in the Gulf War, where a very small fleet of aircraft were part of getting the majority of the priority targets. And then you move forward. We're doing the same thing today, just not a lot I get to talk about. And as it relates to the innovations that we have now, we've navigated through, you had the first jet fighter, then getting high altitude flight, then navigating through speed and flying at Mach 3 plus, and then all the stealth. Where things are happening today, we're pushing on several of those boundaries. We have been the front end of our Lockheed Martin team in the 21st century security construct with hypersonic related technologies, looking at where we can go Mach 5 with weapons or greater, and understanding how to do that, and then learning from those technologies and how they could apply to different systems over the long haul. In addition, we're continuing to push as each of these different domains. There was a common thread through the U-2 and the SR-71 of gathering information. Well, we're in the information age now, where we're looking at how we can integrate all of that information together, fuse that information truly in that 21st century security construct of being able to have as close to omniscient knowledge as you can with a very, very complex adversary, the fog and friction of war, and bring all those things together so that our decision makers have the best possible information that's coming from our aircraft, and then partnering with other domains in a multi-domain fight with space, as well as with the surface domain and subsurface domain, undersea domain, to be able to get all of that information together to make the best possible decisions.
And building on that, and we heard some of this earlier, how do you envision the role of advanced technologies like AI and machine learning to kind of lead us into the next few decades for the defense ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's going to play a very prominent role in everything we do. Just harkening back to the previous speakers, it will be everywhere. Today, we're using and applying artificial intelligence in a myriad of ways. Part of our design life cycle and understanding how we can, through generative design, design an aircraft much faster. As well as in operations, where you're looking at using information and allowing the artificial intelligence to sift through terabytes of information and help make the job of the warfighter easier based on what's presented to them. I think that's one of the things that we've done Candidly, the first artificial intelligence project that I was involved with and doing things with was in 2007. And things that we were doing in the Skunk Works, where we were exploring different deeply layered neural networks to go look at how enemy behaviors were changing based on the actions that we were putting upon them and using that to drive our decision making. We continue to advance thoughts like that and ideas like that. With one nuance that we've learned as we applied some of those technologies to some of the systems that are in operation today is that you really have to focus on adapting around the human, because some of these technologies, if the human, ultimately it's one of the great things with the way in which our nation approaches the application of AI is that it's done in an ethical manner. And by doing that, that's allowing, you have to work around the human that is responsible for ultimately making the decision. AI can't sit in front of a judge and why did you make that decision? But a human does. And so really working that software and that artificial intelligence capability to work around the human, to help feed the human, to make sure that that decision maker, our men and women of the armed services, have the best information to make the decision and then employ the warfighting assets that we provide them.
As Lockheed Martin continues to push the boundaries of innovation, what are some of your challenges you think you're facing in maintaining technical integrity and rapid deployment as you go forward?
Yeah, I think the number one item that I would highlight is our penchant for risk aversion. What is naturally manifested over time is that we've got decades of lessons learned where something didn't go exactly right. Well, it didn't go exactly right based on the technology of the time. And then you fast forward and you try to apply a new technology with a new construct, and a lesson learned from 2 decades ago now comes forward, and it's like, well, we can't do that anymore, or we can't do that. And it's like, well, why not? And you start to navigate through that risk aversion process, and that risk aversion manifests in every facet of the acquisition process. And it's actually one of the interesting things that we talk a lot about is, the Silicon Valley innovation environment. They're there to take risks, and it's a high risk, high reward environment where they come up with new technologies, make a lot of money. In our environment, there's not a lot of money to be made, and our penchant for taking risks has been really, really stifled in a lot of ways because the environment is one that it has to work perfectly the first time, every time. And as an example, the hypersonics testing that we've embarked on over the last several years, we learned things along the way. We took some risks and we found things out. And historically, we would have learned, or we would have had the observation, we would have rapidly course corrected, and then we would have been testing again. In the environment today, we learn those things, and then we sit in and do a root cause, corrective action, exploratory exercise, and 6 months later, we're testing again, instead of 6 days later. And I think that penchant for risk and finding it, the right balance, I think that's the biggest inhibitor to our ability to innovate and go as fast as our adversary is going right now. And most notably, China. They seem to be willing to take a lot more risk than we do.
You talked a little bit about Silicon Valley and probably other startups across the country, but what role are startups going to have as we move forward in strengthening defense in our industrial base?
Yeah, I think they play a very important and prominent role. One of the things that startup ecosystem has is that you get a group of people together. Typically, those startups are going to be smaller. They'll be unified around a vision, and they'll go attack a problem in a very voracious way. And by doing that, they make a lot of progress. And as I was just highlighting, the acquisition system writ large is one that seems to impede progress. And by having a lot of those small entrants pushing hard in the system, I think that will help the entire system in moving forward faster, because there's more ideas, more people saying, we need to go do that and try to pull things through. And so those small entrants, I think, also help the big entities like Lockheed, Martin, Boeing, Northrop, Raytheon, similarly, because that new technology, there's a push for it to happen, and that helps facilitate us having a little bit more voice at that table to also say, hey, we innovate too, and can't we push this through as well?
Well, John, you have a fascinating job. Thank you so much for your time and insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Lockheed Martin for their support of today's program. Now it's time for our panel discussion looking at defense technology and innovation in the defense industrial base. Please welcome Arnold Punaro, founder and CEO of the Punaro Group and chair of the National Defense Industrial Association, Becca Wasser, a senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security, and Vikram Singh, senior vice president at West Exec Advisors and senior advisor for Asia at the United States Institute of Peace. They join Laura Kelly, the Hill's foreign policy reporter.
Good morning. So they took care of introductions. But before I ask you guys questions, I kind of wanted to ask a question to the audience. If you could do me a favor, how many of you, if you could raise your hand, have a cell phone on you? Okay, so just about everybody. And how many of you have a pager on you? Okay, that was a security check. Uh-oh, you gotta go. But maybe too soon. I bring that up with kind of the, low-tech, high-tech defense innovation. And so with our esteemed panel, I'd like to get started. The first question, maybe Arnold, we'll start with you, and we'll go down the line. What is a defense technology, military technology you are most excited about, and where are we today on its development and use?
Well, first of all, thank you, and I want to give thank Lockheed and the Hill for sponsoring a conference on innovating technology. No more important subject. Also, we should give a shout out to the leadership of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee for blocking a CR that ran to March 28. As Secretary Austin said, DOD, under that 6-month CR, would lose about $40 billion in purchasing power and would morph us into the potential sequester, which would happen in April if all the bills aren't passed. And the reason is you can't do a lot of the innovation that's in the bill today. There's over 100 programs that are different from last year that would be stymied. And so CRs are a horrible way to run the government. CRs have we've had 5 years of total CRs that have impacted the Department of Defense. And in terms of the technologies, I would say what I'm most excited about is the technologies our industry has produced, starting way back with the SR-71, the U-2, the stealth fighter, General Dynamics, and the Tomahawk cruise missile with its terrain matching, the B-2, the B-21. GE has just developed a new revolutionary adaptive cycle engine. So these companies have been doing innovative technology for 50 years. And so everybody wants to focus on all this new gizmo, but we need both the traditional and the non-traditional companies. And so I'm very excited about the fact that our industry continues to produce these remarkable technologies. As a military guy that's been in a couple of shooting wars, you need 3 things to have the world's finest military. You need to recruit and retain the very best people. Adam Smith talked a little bit about that. You need to give them constant and realistic training. And we need to give our troops the best technology so they're never in a fair fight. And that's what our industry continues to do.
So air power is what you're most excited about?
Well, no, I'm a ground officer, and I've fought on the ground. And if you don't have air superiority or control of the air, you're not going to be successful in the battlefield. So this notion somehow that future wars are all going to be antiseptic, going to be fought by robots and drones and AI, that's just BS. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to have the implements on the ground, but you also have got to be able to control the air. If Ukraine was able to control the air, the war would have already been over.
Of course, of course. And so you're advocating for you would say for the House plan, a 3-month CR would be preferable?
Well, I don't think a CR is preferable at all. I wish the Congress they haven't passed the appropriation bills on time for 25 years. I wish they'd get their work done on time.
Yeah, but
certainly a 3-month CR is far preferable than morphing into a sequester. And people say, well, Arnold, it'll never happen. It happened in FY12 and FY13, and we had 10 years of $50 billion a year cuts in the defense budget and lost 5 years worth of readiness. And so, Congress needs to start getting their work done on time.
Yes, well, you're not the only one who I think shares that frustration. Becca, if I may turn to you, still on the topic of a defense technology you think is really innovative.
Sure, so I'm going to try and bridge the divide. So here, I'm with you, but it's yes and, right? It's not just some of the technologies that we've been producing for years and years and what we traditionally think of on the battlefield. We need that, but newer, better, smarter, faster. And so for that, we need to start thinking about how we are going to be able to control the air with some of these AI-enabled autonomous weapons, we need to start thinking about how we can actually produce these lower-cost attritable weapons. This means embracing different forms of manufacturing processes and updating all that we've been doing today. So it's that plus some of these new and emerging technologies. And I'll also add that some of the investments in emerging technologies, say hypersonics, for example, are actually helping us today with some of the defense industrial base production shortfalls that we're challenged with for some of the weapons that we've fought with for years and years. A great example is hypersonics. Within hypersonics, they really rely on solid rocket motors. And so we are seeing for the first time in years and years, being able to qualify new sources of solid rocket motors because we are also trying to move forward with hypersonic supply chains. So this is helping us in the interim be able to produce more of a component that you see in missiles, in aircraft, in so many things that are relevant for today, while still trying to move forward with the emerging technology of tomorrow. But in terms of the tech that I'm the most excited about, I'm going to go with AI. AI defined broadly, but thinking really specifically about what AI can do when it comes down to solving some of the joint challenges that we have within the joint force. I do a lot of wargaming, I work on defense operations, and when I look at the way our operational concepts for future warfare are predicated, they're going to break at sort of this joint service level. Why? Because no one actually procures and acquires any of these joint enablers. Here's where I see AI being really helpful to actually create this truly integrated joint force that can fight alongside each other, that can sense, see, and shoot as needed, and also be able to bring our friends along with us, be able to do the coalition warfare that we've done for years and years and is so core to the American way of fighting. So for me, it's AI, however you want to actually apply it.
And Becca, may I just follow up on AI? Are we still in this kind of Wild West period, and is it a race to see how much can be found out, accomplished, as there are efforts to talk about regulation of AI?
So I think there's a widespread push towards the responsible use of artificial intelligence. And here I do think that we are at some of the nascent stages when we start looking at, say, for example, these AI-enabled decision support tools as it relates to warfare. So there's been a lot recently in the news about some of these AI-enabled targeting tools or various decision support tools. We're seeing some of this being road tested right now in current conflicts. I think because of that, there's been this push to start thinking now, thinking in relative peacetime competition about how we can actually use these tools responsibly, use them in coalition environments, and thinking through how we can sort of speed up those processes so that we don't find ourselves being held back by not having that sort of speed of decision making that we think we're going to need in future warfare. So here I would say it's not quite the Wild West, but we are starting to think about these processes, these applications, and working through some of the problems now, because if we try and start working through them when the first balloon goes up, we're probably a little bit too late.
Yeah, balloon. I was thinking about low tech and the weather spy balloon. Vikram, what technology are you most excited about? And if I may also kind of tie it into, we have the Quad Summit coming up this weekend. So is there a specific technology that's good with our partners?
One of the other things I do is I'm an advisor to the Quad Investors Network, and we'll have some announcements about what they've done, hopefully, emerge over the weekend. I'm fingers crossed. But you know, what technology am I excited about? That's basically impossible to answer. If you start diving into the innovation ecosystem, just in the United States, your mind gets blown on a daily basis. So from new, space-based capabilities that used to be exquisite capabilities only in the possession of nation states in terms of remote sensing and RF detection and all sorts of things that can be used globally, now going commercial, to undersea, new technologies for what we can do undersea with long duration, loitering, autonomous vehicles on the surface or under the water. They're all exciting, but I would have to go to where Becca went, which is that
how we use AI is going to really define how effective we are using all these tools. The bottom line is we have fought multiple wars over a generation and a half, going back certainly to the Gulf War, where we could assume superiority in key areas. We had information superiority, we had superiority in terms of being able to bring effects to bear where and when we wanted, and we had air superiority, absolutely. And those are all open to question now. It is not a guarantee that we will have any of those things. And so the asymmetric capabilities that we will bring to bear are going to matter. They're going to be immensely important. So you look at things like Replicator, which is to get massive attritable drone swarms out to support our forces. That's going to matter, and the effectiveness of Replicator is not going to depend just on the hardware that's created, and there are amazing companies building these capabilities, and they range from the primes down to the startups. This is definitely an all of the above, not we need innovators and not legacy primes, we need them all. But how that performs is going to depend on the AI tools that are brought to bear for those systems. And so overall, it's artificial intelligence.
And I just want to follow up on the beginning of your remarks talking about kind of innovation in sea and space. Which domain is the most challenging or the most critical at the moment? We saw that there's the concern over Russia's nuclear use in space, but then we have all these confrontations in the South China Sea. So is it one over the other to focus?
Look, you used to be the country with 11 carrier strike groups, and you didn't have to worry too much about the sea. That is no longer going to be the case. The vulnerabilities that our traditional military systems face are fundamentally things we've never seen before, and what we can't necessarily imagine. You made a reference to exploding pagers at the start of this, and that is not something that Hezbollah was imagining or that anybody watching the region was imagining, but somebody imagined it, over there and made that happen. And that kind of unpredictability is going to be everywhere. What happens if you lose your communications system that you relied on, right? You need to have all sorts of redundancy, and not redundancy in one set of systems, the ability to flip to an entirely different way of communicating and do it in real time. And so I don't know that you can say that any domain from undersea to space to cyber is more or less important than the other. We have to innovate across all domains, and we have to keep leading that innovation. And I do think, to where you started the question, the only way we actually do that is working with our allies and partners and working across the innovation space to the industrial scale, old legacy primes all coming together. So we do need an allied industrial base, and a lot of the new innovative multilateral cooperative efforts we've seen, AUKUS, the Quad, et cetera, are aimed at that.
Mm-hmm. Arnold, I'm going to turn to you. Innovation, people, new ideas. What are some of the things that you're hearing from defense startups for wanting to break into Pentagon contracts and move from, the garage to Washington, D.C.?
What I'm hearing is I tell them, stay in the commercial world. The last thing you want to do is take on the Pentagon bureaucracy. 187,000 people in the acquisition workforce, 35,000 contracting officers, as Adam Smith said, and we all know, it's a suffocating bureaucracy. The regulatory burden, that's what our traditional contractors deal with all the time. And and having served in the military and served as staff director on the Armed Services Committee and now in the business world, I have companies come to me, Arnold, we've got this greatest idea. We want to go get the Pentagon to do it. We'd like to hire you to go help us. I said, I don't do that kind of work. They say, why? I say, because I don't want to waste my time or your money, because the Pentagon is so opposed to anything they didn't think of themselves. And I agree with Becca. We need both traditional, non-traditional. We need allies and partners. And so the challenge is basically, I'd like to see the regulatory and bureaucratic burden on both our traditional and non-traditional contractors removed. I've said in years past, when I've studied this on the Defense Business Board, we ought to take a match to the 51,000 series, the 10,000 pages, and burn it. And Adam Smith talked about OTAs, but OTAs have a lot of bureaucracy with them as well. So if you're a startup, and God bless them, because they are really doing a lot of innovative things, just like our traditional companies are doing innovative things, dealing with the Pentagon bureaucracy and dealing with the uncertainty in the Congress as to when the funding would be made available is really a big deterrent. And furthermore, the Silicon Valley companies, they're used to 40% margins. And basically, you're lucky in the defense business. If you can be in mid to high single digits, you're really doing well. And so the government bureaucracy and the uncertainty of the congressional process, the other thing that's a problem is, they would like us to increase the capacity in our industry, and we need to increase the capacity. We don't have the industrial capacity to support the current national defense strategy. I think we need to go back to the two-war strategy. I think we need to be able to deter, and if deterrence failed, to fight and win two major theaters wars on a near simultaneous basis. We don't have that capacity today. Our industry could do it. But when you ask our fiduciary boards of our industry for profit that have to raise money in the capital markets, invest $100 million or invest $1 billion, in this, and the Pentagon says, just trust us, we're going to give you a contract. Nobody believes the Pentagon anymore. They change their mind at the cyclic rate. One day this is the most important program in the world, and on Thursday, we're killing it. So it's a huge issue, and God bless these startups because they're increasingly innovative, but we have this, in our traditional industries, we have the same challenges that they face. And so unless we can get major reform in the Pentagon in the way we set requirements, and the Iron Majors, by the way, I call them the Iron Majors. I say if the Army could get away with it, they would want a nuclear-powered tank that could fly itself to the battlefield. This is how ridiculous the people are that set requirements in the Pentagon. They don't work with our industry to find out, is it technically feasible? They don't talk about what the cost is, and then this is how you end up with these huge expenses down the road, and then all of a sudden they say, well, we don't want it anymore. We've invested $4 billion in adaptive cycle engine, but we don't want them anymore. We need a Scout helicopter, and our companies invested billions of dollars of their own money to basically meet the Army's requirement. Oh, we've changed our mind. We don't want it anymore. So the uncertainty and the bureaucracy is a killer.
Becca, do you want to?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. I think the uncertain demand signal that comes from the Pentagon, that comes from Congress, that comes from the services to industry, and industry across echelon is possibly one of the greatest challenges. When you add that with this sort of frozen middle bureaucracy that is afraid to take risk, what's the solution there? It's cultural change, but I think we've all been around this town long enough to know cultural change is really hard, and it most certainly does not come fast, and it's not going to come fast enough for what we need. But I think all of this actually gets to a broader point that you were alluding to, which is there is a disconnect between the defense strategy and the defense industrial base. Here, the two are not being wedded. There are assumptions being made about the future requirements for warfare and for joint warfare and for coalition warfare, right? But those aren't being translated into requirements in the traditional sense. They're not being translated into here's what we need, why we need it, the amount that we expect to need it in, and actually having that as some of the clearer demand signal to industry. There's this gap in between, and I think the fact that the Pentagon published a national defense industrial base strategy is emblematic of that, because the two don't have to be two separate documents. It doesn't have to be two different conversations. In fact, we've gotten here because it's been two separate conversations with two different communities, both sort of working in parallel rather than working together. So here I would say that as we start thinking through the ways in which we are going to have a new national defense strategy quite soon, I happen to staff the Commission on the National Defense Strategy, which was a congressionally appointed bipartisan commission where all of the commissioners were in violent agreement that what the next defense strategy looks like is going to be vastly different from the current one. So we need to start thinking through how we can actually bridge that divide now in order to get over some of those challenges, but in order to start all hewing together in the same direction, because I believe we all are, but we're talking past each other, and it's creating all of these problems.
Yeah, I just want to be a little more optimistic than Arnold, because, thank goodness there are innovators in our economy and in Silicon Valley who are saying, look, we know it's hard, but we're going to figure out how to make sure our technologies can be brought to bear on the most critical national security challenges that the United States faces, and God bless them for doing it. The problem right now is you kind of have to be an Anduril or Palantir to have a shot. And what an Anduril has is billionaire founders who are like, I will spend money until I make it. They can therefore take that risk and decide that they will try to pole vault themselves over the valley of death. If anybody thinks we have solved the valley of death with AFWorks and SoftWorks and DIU and Raider and Replicator and all the great things we're doing, which are really important because they have at least brought a possibility and gotten a spark. There is this dismal middle where you can't get to a program of record. You can't get into a world in which it's truly sustainable for the vast majority of these businesses. So I think Arnold's diagnosis is right. I think we have an awful lot of patriotic innovators who are willing to work with the government and figure out how they can get their technologies to the warfighter. But we do need to help them do that. And our systems, beyond just the acquisition system, overall our system is also broken, and it does go back to this budgeting issue. When the budget lands in March, the cycle just it doesn't work. It breaks. And these are not companies that can withstand. Hey, you're not going to get paid for a year or two because all this stuff happened, right? They need to be able to rely on what's coming. And so for me, a lot of times the recommendation is you need to be, it's got to be dual use. If you've got a dual use capability, if you can build your viability of your company on the commercial side and then figure out how to build up a defense business on the back of that, that is often the most viable option for innovators.
And so to address some of the challenges that you laid out, what is the best leadership? Does it come from the president making an executive decision? Does it come from Congress? Does it come from Republicans, Democrats? Is it a bipartisan fix? Or is it Pentagon leadership? Do we need an innovator at the Pentagon who can just say, let's blend these, let's
I mean, to me, look, I like to take a narrow little time frame on rapid innovation in defense and start it with IEDs in the Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns and the creation of the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell at DoD that got us MRAPs and things that could help our soldiers survive better in the theaters and the things they were encountering. And then I would run it through right now and what you see Ukraine doing vis-a-vis Russia. Our problem is our most rapid innovation has been driven by total crisis, right? When we're actually in the war. Somehow we need to short circuit that and act as if we're in the war now. I think we probably did it in the 80s when we decided we needed to up the defense budget significantly. We're close to 3% of GDP on defense. I think we were 6.5% in the mid-1980s. And so I do think one of the things that's a problem is that we maybe are not really recognizing yet that if you take China and Russia, really starting to band together and you add in a little North Korea and a little Iran, the scale of the challenges we face is truly unprecedented. And we and our allies and partners together need to figure out how to do more. Part of that, I do think, is spending more, and then part of that is leveraging tools like AI to get a lot more efficient. Nobody talks about the boring side of AI. Nobody talks about what's between Ukraine fielding a capability and it getting down that tooth to tail, right? But the AI tools that can help you with budgeting, with logistics, with knowing what's where and when and available where and when, they're really remarkable. And we can transform the defense business, but it's got to be a combination of bottom up from within the bureaucracy and top down leadership to change our systems.
Please.
So I agree completely. It's leadership. It's basic leadership. You need leadership in the Pentagon like CAFIX is doing with Replicator. You need leadership on the Hill. You need appropriators to get their work done on time. You need leadership in our industry, which I think the leadership in the traditional and non-traditional, it's more there than it is in government. I'd also like to say, when I talk about the bureaucracy, it's not the people. The people in the Pentagon come to work every day trying to do the very best job they can for the warfighter. It's the process. Former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry told me one year, Arnold, bad processes beat good people every day. And as Becca said, we've got to fundamentally change the processes in the building on requirements and acquisition and budgets. We've got to change them on the Hill. The Planning, Programming, Budgeting Commission made a lot of recommendations. The Pentagon is looking at them. They like some of them. The authorizing committees like some of them. But guess what? The appropriators that haven't passed their bills on time for 25 years are opposed to any change. They don't want to change the process because they want people to come up and kiss their butts every year to basically get money for their programs. And so you've got to change the process. And so Congress but it's leadership. If you don't have reform leaders, the other point I would make is in terms of the money, and I think we need to spend more, but we need to get more bang for the buck for the dollars we spend. In constant dollars, we are spending more today than the peak of the Reagan buildup. We have 1 million less active duty people. The fighting force is 50% smaller. My second book is called The Ever-Shrinking Fighting Force. And one of the reasons is the runaway cost of the all-volunteer force that Adam Smith talked about. You've got to pay them. But if you look at the healthcare budget in the Pentagon, $54 billion, 10 million beneficiaries, of which 5.6 million are retirees and their dependents. We spend more on people that are no longer serving than we do on people that are serving. The bloated and the overhead in the Pentagon, in the 28 defense agencies, we started with 1 NSA, and now we have 28, over 1 million active duty defense civilians and defense contractors, and huge amounts of money. And so we are not getting the bang for the buck. So it's got to be leadership, and we've got to fundamentally change the processes in the building, in the White House, and on the Hill.
Well, I think we're just about out of time, but a really interesting conversation. I have so many more questions, but I want to say a big thank you to our panel, and thank you all for being here.
Please welcome Congressman Rob Wittman, a Republican from Virginia, chair of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces, and vice chair of the House Armed Services Committee, in conversation with the Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack.
Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay, so last night was a dramatic night. That the CR went down.
Yes.
14 Republicans voted against it. You voted for it.
I did.
What now?
Well, we're back to the drawing board. I think what will happen is we'll have some now different configuration of that. I'd like to see the period of time shorter, have it end sometime in December so we can actually get something done this year. But it'll be interesting to see what comes up next. I think we have to get something done fairly soon. That would be by the middle of next week. If the House doesn't, I think the Senate's going to act, and the Senate will send over theirs and probably leave town.
They're already starting that process.
They're starting theirs right now.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a convergence of different forces to be, and the question will be who prevails in that process. I think where we end up is probably close to a CR that doesn't have a whole lot of anomalies in it. I think there'll be some in it, and a CR that's probably somewhere in the December timeframe, if I had to guess.
Do you think, and I mentioned earlier that Chairman Rogers voted against, he was one of the 14 that voted no. Mm-hmm. Do you think that House leadership, Speaker Johnson, is going to listen to the recommendations of people like you and say, let's go shorter. Let's not cost us 6 months.
Listen, there are a number of competing voices out there, some that want it to go into next year, believing somehow that the House is going to end up with this massive omnibus in December. I would argue that that's not where we have to be. We've done 5 of the 7 appropriations bills. There's no reason why you couldn't take defense and pass that by itself, and then take the remaining 7, try to get as many of those done as you can, and then be able to maybe put some of the bills that are done together, maybe 2 or 3 at a point in a series of minibuses, especially since they've already passed the House. That would be an easier proposition going forward. So I think there are a lot of options there. If you have the CR, expire maybe in the first week of December, because you want the month of November for Congress to be able to work on it, since we're going to be back essentially the week after the election.
Right. You recently launched the Defense Modernization Caucus.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about it and why you formed it.
Well, listen, I am very, very interested in making sure that the Pentagon operates at the speed of relevance. You heard some of the panelists on the previous panel talking about the problems on acquisition, how the process is slow, it's arduous, it's all process-driven. It's not driven about making sure we have the proper tools to deter our adversaries and when called upon to win. The Defense Modernization Caucus is about doing further reforms to the acquisition process to make sure that we are looking at, not just how we normally have acquired, and that is looking at exquisite platforms, but also looking at those places where we can quickly close the gap. We can quickly close the gap as we look at attritable platforms and expendable platforms. We get more for our dollar there. And listen, this is not an or proposition, it's an and proposition. We need those exquisite platforms, but if we're going to do things at the speed of relevance, we have to make sure that we incorporate those cutting-edge technologies. And we have to make sure that the Pentagon changes from a hardware-centric organization to a software-centric organization. Software will drive the future. Software is what will create capabilities in our hardware. In fact, you can take a lot of stuff off the shelf and make it do some pretty incredible things if you have software. We have to figure out how to acquire software. One of the things too is looking at how software companies normally enter into contracts. They don't do cost plus contracts. They do firm fixed price. So how do we make sure that we are acquiring in the right way? How do we make sure that we change the process? How do we make sure too that we open up what I call landing space for these emerging companies? You heard the talk about Anduril and Palantir and General Atomics, but we have to open up landing space for other companies to be able to scale. Right now we still have that valley of death, and you can live in the phase 1 and phase 2 world, and we do a lot of neat things in DARPA, but the question is how do we operationalize some of that technology? And the way we do that is create landing space for companies to be able to say, I've got a good idea, I want to go to production, I want to scale. How do we make sure they can get there? Because just as you heard before, what's happening is there's a lot of private equity and venture capital that's moving into this space, but it doesn't stay there forever. Remember, that window is pretty short, so if these companies don't get the conduit to actually have a contract to operationalize all the great things that they do, then they fade away. So those are the things that the Modernization Caucus is focused on. And the good news is that our colleagues in the Senate just opened up a new Defense Modernization Caucus in the Senate. Senator Mark Kelly, Senator Kevin Kramer, who I served with in the House, have started on the Senate side. So there's a lot of synergy that's unfolding there with that effort.
Speaker Johnson and other Republicans, assuming the best case scenario where Republicans have everything, they've got the White House and both chambers of Congress, have an aggressive agenda. Mitch McConnell also wants to boost defense spending. Republicans want to extend the Trump tax cuts. That would be roughly $4 trillion just on the tax cut component. There are other pricey proposals coming from both candidates. But very few are talking about debt, and many people have testified before Congress that debt is a massive national security concern. How do you balance that?
Well, listen, it is a significant concern. I had a town hall with the folks at the Richmond Federal Reserve, and the director there said the number one question he gets when he travels around the Richmond region for the Federal Reserve is deficit and debt. And it is a strategic and economic challenge for this nation. And it's a simple math problem. I mean, we have to be able to address all aspects of the budget, both discretionary and non-discretionary. The one place that becomes politically perilous to even mention are the autopilot spending programs. And if you look today, we have about $1.6 trillion in spending on the discretionary budget side, appropriation side. If you look just today, in the last 365 days, the deficit's $2.4 trillion. If you could cut out all discretionary spending, you still don't get anywhere close to addressing the deficit. We have to have an adult discussion about the entire spending in the United States, all of it. Put it on the table, and I think you have to have a dialogue with the American people. And so here's the math problem. And rely on them to give you the feedback to what they believe the solution should be, because if not, then it gets embroiled in this political back and forth. It becomes a political game of tennis, where it's back and forth. It's if you want to make any reforms to the system to make it balanced, and you want to take things away from people. No, these systems have people's money in there. We have an obligation to make sure they at least get that money back. But the trustees tell us if we don't fix those things in the early 2030s, those systems run out of money and run out of money quickly. So we have to do things, I think, sooner than later. In Congress's infinite wisdom, as you've seen in the past, I wish I could tell you that it would be done way up front. I suspect as the time draws nearer to the 2030s, that'll get Congress's attention and something will happen. I'd like to think that we would put in place measures that would create the long-term viability for those systems. But as we've seen in the past, sometimes there are short-term measures that buy you another 5 or 10 years of solvency in the system. I think if you're going to do it, you need to be all in and fix the system for the long term. And I think there's some pretty thoughtful ways to do that to protect. I want to emphasize, we need to protect the money that people have put into those systems. If not, then this whole thing gets turned upside down.
Our adversaries are getting more aggressive. China, Russia, which is meddled in our elections, and I remember interviewing Secretary Pompeo, and he basically said they're never going to stop.
Right.
And they haven't. Iran, through its use of proxies. obviously, those are all countries that have to be focused on, but what is the most important issue that you think for this audience and people watching that maybe it doesn't get the attention it deserves?
Well, I think looking at the sustainability of the United States military across all those spectrums, and listen, the theater as we see it unfolding with the war between Ukraine and Russia is very different than what we see in the Indo-Pacific. And I think even as we see how warfare is unfolding there, it's going to be very different than anything that happens in the Pacific. One thing we have to be able to do and be willing to do is we have to clearly state the threat. We have to clearly state what it will take to counter that threat. I think people today think, oh, China's never going to do that because, you know, all these things are in their economic interest not to try to take Taiwan. Do not discount when Xi Jinping says he's going to do something, that he will do it. When he says military be ready in 2027, doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to go on January 1st of 2027, but it means that he wants that option on the table. So we have to be, I think, more communicative with the American people as to what the threats are. And they aren't just strategic threats. They're economic threats. If you look on July 10th, look at the directive that China issued to say, we are not selling rare earth to anybody else unless they do what we say. We're not allowing any of the technology that we develop on rare earth magnets or any of the other technology there to be exported. They are really ramping down to say we are going to control the part of the marketplace that they have through the years dominated. In critical minerals and rare earth elements, that's why I'm part of the Select Committee on China and I'm leading a working group on critical minerals and rare earth elements. We've got to get in the game there, because if not, China will have complete control over us in many ways that we don't even envision. And we got to, as Jerry Reed would say, we have a long ways to go in a short time to get there. We have to make sure that we get this done. And I think there are ways for us to get it done. I think there are a lot of ways we can capitalize this very quickly. You know, think about the things we have in the United States. You know, we have massive amounts of tailings from existing mining operations that we could reprocess for both critical minerals and rare earth elements. Think about it too. Today as we speak, 16 of the 18 mines in Africa are owned by China. We know what China does. They use forced labor. They destroy environments. They are the worst human rights violators on the face of the earth. They kill their own population. With the Uyghur population, they sterilize Uyghur women. Do you ever hear a word about that from the United States? Not a word. I mean, think about the things that we ought to be doing, but everybody's scared of China, don't want to upset China. Well, the only way that we're going to be able to take these things on is we have to be self-sufficient. We have to be able to separate ourselves from China on things that they have worked so hard in the years to occupy parts of the value chain. The greatness of America has rested in our value chain. We have been able to do things from the birth of materials to the sunset of materials. We have mined those materials. We've extracted them. We've refined them. We've smelted them. We've turned them into metals. We produce value-added products with the metals. Now we need to be recycling those metals. We have a lot of what we need already here in the country. We got to do more in recycling. We have to stand up to China for who they are. They have no interest in the rule of law. They have no interest in the dignity of the human being. They have no interest in protecting the environment. Just look at what they do in their own country. Look at some of the places you can't even breathe the air. And yet we enable them by surrendering ourselves to the markets that they dominate. We need to get back in the business, because we know when we develop our minerals, we'll do it better than anybody on the face of the earth. We'll take care of our workers. We'll take care of the environment. We are at a tipping point where we need to tell the American people this is an all-in proposition. We have to also develop our own energy, which we know we can do better than anybody else. We can develop nuclear power to do it in the cleanest way of anybody else and not build coal plants like China does. I mean, these are simple solutions. We just have to be able to stand up and tell the American people what's necessary. And I believe if we do, I believe that they are all in. They will be all in. But there has to be a vision, and we have to talk about what's necessary going forward.
And what is necessary? I mean, there was a great report from 60 Minutes on how, I remember 14, 15 years ago, a high-ranking Navy official said, listen, the South China Sea is not getting the attention it deserves. Now it's getting more attention, but they had a great report on not only Taiwan, but the Philippines.
Yes.
So what's the answer? Ships? I mean, we're way behind on that.
Yeah, we're way behind on ships. We have to start off doing a better job of maintaining our ships so they get to their expected service life. We're retiring ships early today. That's our fault. That's our fault in not maintaining those ships. Let's start there. Okay. Let's make sure the operational availability is where it needs to be. Second of all, we do need to build more ships, but we need to not only build exquisite platforms, the aircraft carriers and the submarines, but we need to get into the attritable and expendable platform business. And we need to do that in mass quickly because that is a game changer. When you combine those attritable and expendable platforms with the exquisite platforms, all of a sudden, we have a massive amount of capability that really complicates the risk calculus for the Chinese. Those are things we can do quickly. We can close the gap with China. We have the technological know-how here, and I would argue we can do it better than the Chinese if we operationalize that. If you watch what's happening in the Indo-Pacific, especially in the South China Sea, and what they're doing in militarizing those coral reefs, which are now islands. I was out the Second Thomas Shoal and saw them, using water cannons to blast Philippine Navy crews that are trying to maintain a ship out there that is essentially their military base on Second Thomas Shoal. This aggressive behavior is exactly what the Chinese are doing. They are the bullies in the neighborhood. The only thing that deters them is power and lots of it. And we want to make sure that they understand that there will be a reaction to anything that they do. And we should be doing things in a preventive manner. I want to make sure that we do things each and every morning, and that is creating more capacity, more complexity to what China sees in the Indo-Pacific. We need to make sure we do it to the extent where every morning Xi Jinping wakes up and goes, no, not today. And those are challenges for us because the Chinese continue to do things at the pace of relevance. We need to do things at the pace of relevance. And you heard the former panelists talk about getting the Pentagon to operate at the speed of relevance. I think there are a lot of good folks in the Pentagon, but there are also people that are what I call process-driven, and it's process-driven myopathy. It's, I'm going to follow process, whether the process is right or not, or whether they know instinctually that we could do things differently and do it better. We have to be able to build capacity and capability at the speed of relevance, and it has to be software-driven, and we have to be able to use all the tools on the table, including off-the-shelf technologies, which I argue many times are well ahead of what requirement writing, an RFP, and the delivery of those systems through the normal acquisition process will actually get into the hands of the warfighter. And we've done it. I mean, we've shown these things. You heard it referred to here. Think about it. We saw what was happening with IEDs there in the Middle East, whether it was Afghanistan or Iraq. And Congress said, we got to do something about it. So open up the window, put out an RFP. A number of vendors put their proposals in, and we said we have to get to a certain number in a very short period of time. So instead of down selecting and awarding to one contractor there, guess what? We awarded to all the contractors. We said, here's the ceiling. We're going to produce to this level, produce as many of them as fast as you can. And guess what? We produced 1,000 MRAPs in 6 months. So don't tell us that we can't do those things. We can if we allow the process to operate the way it should.
Many challenges ahead. We're out of time. Please thank the Congressman for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Good stuff.
Thank you. That was great.
Well done.
Our final guest is Chuck Hagel, former Secretary of Defense and former Republican Senator from Nebraska. During his tenure, he directed significant steps to modernize America's partnerships and alliances, advance the rebalance in Asia-Pacific, bolster support for European allies, and enhance defense cooperation in the Middle East. Welcome.
How are you?
Hi.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us. I don't know what to call you, Senator, Mr. Secretary, Professor, Businessman. You've got a lot of titles, but...
Well, Chuck works.
Okay, Chuck. Well, you made some news yesterday. You were among 100-plus national security officials to endorse Harris for president. Can you tell us how that effort came about and why you got on board?
Well, we could be at this for hours, but I have always believed in, and I hope I've practiced this in all the privileges I've had to serve this country in different ways. Character is the most important requisite of leadership. Character includes honesty, decency, relevancy, but that's where you start. I've always believed character is more important than policy, because if you don't have character at the top of an institution, it's going to end up badly, regardless of policy. That's where I started. I think Vice President Harris does have that quality. I've always believed the three indispensable requisites of leadership are character, courage, and judgment. Indispensable requisites for life, quite frankly, but certainly for leadership. And in a nutshell, that's why I endorsed her, and not Trump, because I don't think he possesses character.
Okay, well, when you were, you've been on the inside, obviously, a leader at the Pentagon, and a while back you launched the Defense Innovation Initiative. Now, outside, back in the private sector, looking back, how is the Pentagon doing compared to that initiative and its goals?
Well, I'm not up to date, excuse me, with all of it, but I think they've done okay. And I say that because the Pentagon, like any institution in government, is restricted by, first of all, budget. Since 2011, we've been living with continuing resolutions. For an institution like the Pentagon, or any institution, you can't plan. And because the Pentagon is the largest institution in the world, the most complicated, you have to have that ability to plan 5 years out, 3 years, and so on. The congressman was talking about innovation. It's hard to innovate without that. Also, over the years, I think the flexibility of the Pentagon's management has really been limited by, for example, I remember when I was there, I suspect it's still the same as I talked to the secretaries, the ability to shut down bases. We haven't had base closures for years and years and years. When I was there, we thought about 24% of the capacity we had, we didn't need. They were duplicate, they were old, and we need to shut down some bases. Another is old platforms. Example, A-10 Warthog. Great plane in its day, but has lost capacity. Every time we would try to shut it off or phase it out, no, you can't do that. Well, my point in using those examples is a lot of flexibility has been taken away from the Pentagon's management. Now, I've been on both sides of that table. The Congress has a very important responsibility and oversight. But when you've got, and by the way, the first month I was there in February of 2013, sequestration hit. And we continue to cut $50 billion a year from our budget. Well, when you take away those resources, and I don't think the Pentagon budget's heavy enough now to address some of these things, you got a problem. But going back to, I think, the original point, and the congressman hit this, is innovation. And that's why I announced the Defense Innovation Initiative when I did in 2014. We've got to start looking at things differently. And that means you've got to bring in the private sector more completely and outside of the Pentagon thinking. I mean, look at what's just happened in Lebanon in the last couple of days. Now, that's not good news, but it's reality. And we've got to stay ahead of that as much as we can. I don't think any country or any institution, the Pentagon included, as great as it is, and I think our military is the best in the world for many reasons, mainly because of our people, because you're only as strong as the weakest link. But that innovation and freshness and newness to bring in all resources is really critical, and it's particularly critical now going forward.
What, with limited resources for every agency, including the Department of Defense, there's always got to be prioritization. There has been some disputes, arguments of whether U.S. policymakers should be focusing more on China or Russia, and obviously we got to focus on both, but where should we be prioritizing?
Well, you've got to prioritize everything. I mean, for the Pentagon, I mean, that's their assignment, that's their responsibility. Well, I'll give you an example. In 2014, I spent about 5 days in China. I met with Xi 3 different times, and one of the main reasons I went to China was because of what the Chinese were doing in the South China Sea, East China Sea. Congressman was talking a little bit about that. but I wanted to see myself, get my own sense, and I've been to China a number of times before I was Secretary of Defense. First time I went was 1983. But I wanted to also see their NCO school. The Russians don't have really any kind of competent NCO corps. Mm-hmm. You can't have a first-rate military without a first-rate NCO corps. What the Chinese had done, and this is just an example, they had copied our NCO training approach academy, and I went to see it, spent a day there. Pretty sophisticated. I don't think it's as good as ours. Now that was 2014. So, but the point being, what I saw in China was, and you don't see it all, but a military that was getting better and more sophisticated, more competent, but they were not as good as ours, which leads us to another piece of this conversation. Like I said, we could be at this for days. Right. People. I mean, we all know people are everything, and you've got to have the best leaders, especially at the NCO Corps. And yes, the officer corps is important, generals and admirals are important, but boy, that NCO Corps is critical. So we've got an issue, a problem, a challenge because of our recruitment. And it was an issue that I talked about when I was secretary, because that recruitment leads to retention issues after 20 years of 2 wars. That was a big part of the problem because the same people kept going back, redeployed, redeployed, redeployed. And that caused a lot of problems, especially when they got out. But I think my point being is when you view this, you've got to use the accumulation of all these pieces to understand the strength of a military. I don't think the Chinese have what we have. Now, they are sophisticated. They're the best military next, I think, to ours.
Right.
They've got the numbers, the strength, innovation, but they don't have the freedom of the individuals and the people and the thinking. And that's another component of people in our system is freedom. And that doesn't mean you take them lightly. We can't because of what they're doing, the Belt and Road systems and so on and so on and so on. But we've got to be smart and we've got to be serious. And I think it goes back again to giving our leadership at the Pentagon more flexibility. That leads to more innovation and more opportunity to keep us ahead of China and everyone else, because it's not going to get any simpler or any less dangerous. And I think we're seeing that today in Ukraine, the Middle East, and how those things are resolved, when they are resolved, the time it takes to get to the next step really depends on us. And then, and I'm sorry to ramble along here, but I think all these pieces are important. The other thing I would say, critical, and this is another reason I endorsed Harris, alliances. Alliances have always been critical. The United States could never have projected power in the world like we have since World War II, and like we are still doing without alliances and partners. Yes, it helps them that we're there in NATO, but NATO is critically important for the future of this country and the world, and those alliances are critically important to the future of freedom in this country.
Well, speaking of the Vice President, what, in this space in particular, what advice would you have for her if she does become the Commander-in-Chief?
Well, that again, we could take days, but discussing that.
30 seconds, you know, wrap.
Yeah. Well, you know, a former senator, when you say 30 seconds, that's almost
not gonna
impossible.
work.
That's, Bob. Well, I'll try to do it in 30 seconds.
Right. No, I'll give you.
I think what she's got to do is what she knows she has to do. I mean, she's been vice president almost 4 years. She was in the Senate before that.
Right.
She's got a good experience base. No one comes into that job, obviously, with all the answers and all the abilities. I mean, it's a tough job. Everybody's got some weaknesses. Learn from other people, but bring good people around you. As a president, that is so key. It's key for any leader. Good people, surround yourself with good people. I think, go back to my 3 requisites for leadership. Be direct, be clear, be honest with the American people and our allies and our adversaries. And don't be afraid of innovation. Try things new. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. I used to say to President Obama, you know, Mr. President, we're going to make mistakes, but you just don't want to make the big ones. And I think she's got those qualities, and she's got a Nebraska boy helping her in Waltz. So I think that team will be a good team, but I think she's ready for this. A president grows every day. A president learns something every day. Joe Biden is a very good friend of mine. I mean, we've known each other, worked with each other over 25 years. And I think he was important for this country and the world the last 4 years to bring some stability to our leadership in the world, to our friends and our allies, to our country. I mean, no country is perfect. No president's policies are perfect. But if you look at what's happened in this country over the last 3-4 years, we're moving in a right direction. And I think Harris, with some new ideas and new thinking, a new generation of leadership, if she builds on that and can get better on some things we haven't done well in the last 4 years, it's what she needs to do.
Last question, I've saved the best for last. Any interest in joining her team if she asks you to?
No, I mean, I'll help her. I'll help her in any way.
Been there, done that?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a great run and great privileges and great opportunities to serve this country in so many different ways, and in the private sector and so on. And she needs new, fresh leadership with new ideas. And I'll help her in any way. She knows that, and Waltz knows that. And I can be, I think, more helpful if I don't have a job.
From the outside.
From the outside.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, we've run out of time. I'm sorry I can't call you Chuck. So please thank the secretary for joining us.
Thank
and
you.
I hand it back to Joe.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks
Bob,
so much.
thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to thank Secretary Hagel and all of our great speakers today. This concludes our program. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Lockheed Martin. On behalf of Lockheed Martin and ourselves, thank you all for coming. If you missed any portion of the show, the event, I should say, everything will be online at thehill.com. Thank you again.